Hey guys, Andy here at Genji. In today's video, we will be showing how to install our tri-fuel conversion kit on the Generac GP3000i or the GP3300i. Both are the same generators. The only difference between the two is the starting watts is a lot higher for the 3300i compared to the 300i. Excuse me, 3000i. Other than that, internally and externally, they're both the same. Before we get started, I'm going to go over some of the most common questions we get for this kit. And one of the most common questions we get asked is this a 100% complete kit? Yes, it is. It is a 100% complete kit. I'm going to have to say this again. I get customers ask me all the time. You don't have to go to the hardware store. You don't have to go look for anything else. When you pull everything out of the box, it's ready to go. You install it. That's it. You don't have to look for anything else. You don't have to worry about any missing pieces. We provide that all for you. In this tri-fuel kit, we offer a complete tri-fuel kit. Our competitors, maybe not. I can see where customers can ask, is it a complete kit? But no, for us, we include everything you need, okay? And not only that, this is a drill-free kit, meaning there is no cutting, no drilling, no modifications. It is a complete bolt-on kit, which makes this very nice, all right? And not only that, let's say if you were to sell a generator and so forth, and you don't want to sell the kit with this, you can unbolt everything, and it reverts everything back to factory, and it looks nice when everything is bolt on rather than cutting holes and drilling holes in the generator and so forth. And that's been our most popular request, is to have a drill-free kit. Okay. Another nice thing about this kit that we get asked a lot is when you do install everything, there is no fuel adjustment needed. This is set for propane right out of the box. You install it, hook up a propane tank, and you're ready to go. Right? There's no fiddling around with the fuel adjustments or anything like that. You don't have to spend an hour or 2 hours testing the generator and so forth and trying to get it to run perfectly. No, we do that here at our warehouse and in our office. We set the fuel settings for you. It's perfect. Once you get the kit installed and up and running, you don't have to do any fuel adjustments, which is completely convenient and extremely nice for you to have on our kit. So that's another main difference that sets us apart from other competitors. Another common question and concern I get about this kit is, will I lose any power when I convert this to propane or natural gas? Upon our own testing, we have not seen any power loss, whether you're on either fuel. This can be seen on our video with the Predator 3500. That's been our most popular video. You can see on there that we've tested both on natural gas and propane, and we have not seen any power loss. And how we're able to achieve this is through our patented fuel adapter, and it definitely shows through our videos again that we have not seen any power loss. So many improvements on this kits, and through our own methods of testing and so forth, we were able to achieve that, and it was been very difficult to do that. So that's one of the other reasons why folks buy our kit, is because we have not seen that kind of power loss, and we worked very hard to make sure that you're able to extract as much power as you can, especially when you're running on alternative fuels. And I know that folks rather would run gasoline, and they're always afraid of running natural gas or propane because of power loss. But for us, we have not seen that, and we haven't had any complaints from our customers who run their AC systems in their travel trailers or RV, that there was any significant power loss or anything like that. They were able to run their equipment at full power, and I have not had any issues. So moving forward, our last most common question is, hey, I live 5,000 feet above sea level. How do I adjust for altitude on your kit? And I say it's very easy. So here we have two adjustments on this is what I call the regulator assembly. So you have the low idle here. I call this low idle. This is the high idle adjustment. Other folks call it the other folks call it the load block. I call it the high idle adjustment. And you do so here. Okay. So currently, this fuel setting, at the moment I have it set at 19 millimeters. So how I do the adjustment is by, hold on a second, let me get this tool out for you. So we have this digital micrometer here, and we measure from here to here, and it's at 19. Okay. When you're at 5,000 feet above sea level, you want to adjust that down to I would say between 18 and 19, I would do it in 0.25 millimeter increments. So you start at 19, bring it down to 18.75. Run the generator, see if it runs great, then bring it down to 18.5 millimeters. Once that's there, lock it down, and you should be all set. You do not have to do anything with the low idle adjustment. You only do it here, okay? And if you're at 10,000 feet above sea level, you may want to adjust that some more, but I wouldn't go any more below 18 millimeters. And do remember that for every 1,000 feet, I believe my math could be wrong, but every 1,000 feet above sea level, you lose about between 2 to 3% in engine power output, and that's just due to the less air density as you go higher. So the air density gets lower and lower as you go higher in altitude, and it's just the way it is. So when you notice that if you have a trailer and you're up at 10,000 feet above sea level and you notice that you're losing power output, and you're thinking, oh, is it the tri-fuel kit that I'm selling? No, it's just if you run on alternative fuels or gasoline, you're going to lose power because, like I mentioned, it's just the air's a lot thinner at high altitudes, and when the air's a lot thinner, it's just harder to. It's the same way as you were to climbing the side of the mountain. The air just feels a lot thinner, and you have a hard time taking in air. Same way with the generator. Generator's not going to have enough volume of air coming in. It's because the air is a lot thinner up at 5 or 10,000 feet. Okay. Oh, I almost forgot. Another question I get a lot is, how do I switch over to natural gas? And where is the propane jet orifice? So this is a fuel adapter, okay, that's going to be installed in that generator. And if you peer down the brass fitting here, you'll notice there's a screw on the inside with an orifice. All right, so you take in your Allen key, you're going to remove that like this, and there's a jet orifice. Put it off on the side for safekeeping. Okay, and when you have that removed, you slip the hose back on. That's it. You don't have to install anything in this fitting. It runs open like this, and you slip the hose back in, and you're all set on the fuel adapter side. And for the regulator assembly, you're going to want to adjust this to 22.5 millimeters. And here, remove this screw on the inside, this brass screw. That's a lock screw. When you remove that, you'll see another screw on the inside. Take your flathead Phillips screwdriver, and with your digital caliper, measure 8 millimeters. So you want to set this to 8 millimeters. So put this on the inside like this. Don't put in that slot. The correct way is to measure from that surface to this surface here. Set that to 8 millimeters. Then go ahead and put that screw back in, lock it down, and don't forget to lock this down as well too. So 22.5 millimeters, 8 millimeters down here. Once you have those two settings set, you should be able to run natural gas. And also, you just obviously can't run natural gas with this in here. This is a propane pressure regulator. You're going to need to remove that. Once you have this removed, you would take your hose that you would either can purchase from me or through your local hardware store, and plumb the hose into this fitting here, and the other end of the hose goes into your natural gas meter. Okay. Here are the tools needed for the tri-fuel kit installation on the GP3000i and 3300i. We have the long nose Phillips head screwdriver, standard length Phillips head screwdriver, flat nose pliers, 10 millimeter wrench, 3/8 ratchet with a 13/16 deep well socket, 1/4 inch ratchet with a 10 millimeter deep well socket. Next to it is a shallow 10 millimeter socket. Here we have an 8 millimeter deep well socket on with a 1/4 inch extension. We have a flashlight, a magnetic pickup tool, and right here is your pick tool. Upon receiving your kit, this should include here the hose assembly with bracket, fuel adapter, spark plug. We have the kill switch kit right here. We have the door, side door with hardware. Here's your fuel adapter hardware, which includes a gasket and extended studs. And here's the regulator fuel assembly. Starting off, what we're going to do is on this side of the generator, we're going to move these 4 bolts on top near the handle. We're going to move these 10mm bolts on the bottom here. We're going to remove 4 bolts on the outer side of the front panel, and we're going to go ahead and remove the front face plate of the generator here. And there's also a screw right here that needs to be removed. I'll show you that before you can take this whole front face plate off here. And in the back of the generator, there's about 6 screws holding the exhaust cover. That needs to be removed. On the other end of the generator, you don't need to remove anything. Mainly this side would be taken off. So what we're doing is that we're splitting open this generator in order to have better access to the carburetor. As I was mentioning, there's a screw inside this knob that has to be removed. If you don't remove this, the whole face plate won't come off. So you have to take this knob out first. And to do that, you would take your long nose Phillips head screwdriver, stick it in all the way in, all right, and just go ahead and unscrew the knob. This bolt here, all right, don't lose this bolt, okay? Put it off on the side. If you lose it, you're gonna have a hard time finding a replacement bolt for that, okay? Then go ahead and take off these screws. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's 2 more at the bottom, 7, 8, okay? This is where your magnetic tool comes in handy. So once you unscrew this, and you know that the hole here is a little too deep, you can't go in and pick the screw out. You just take your magnetic tool here, and there you go, comes right out. Same thing on the other side. All right. Once you remove all the screws that I've shown, there is not another screw, but there's a little spring clip on here that needs to be removed. So if you lift up this flap, well, you can take this off first, might be a little easier. There's that clip on the inside here. So take your pick tool and go in and slowly and carefully remove this without losing it. Okay, like this. I have a magnetic tray. I leave that in there with all my screws, so that way no screws roll off, or if I kick the plate by accident or anything like that, I won't lose any screws. So this is another nice tool to have. Or use a cup, so that way you don't lose any screws. All right. Here's what the generator should look like once you've taken apart the panels and remove the screws. So you have this nice and loose. That's taken off. And on the back side, it should look like this. So here are the side panel and the exhaust cover for the back. I'm going to go over real quick why we need to remove this this portion of the generator casing. Is because if you look inside, this is in the way right here, and it's hard to really have your finger go in and install the fuel adapter this way. And not only that, there's this choke plate that's in the way as well. So it's a lot easier just to take this, remove this half the cover off, and have access to the carburetor, rather than trying to, fight this small space you have over here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this cover here. Just wiggle it. It should come off like so. Now you have all the space right here to do the work. Okay, we're going to take one side of the hose off. There's 2 nuts, so one here and one there, and we're going to take that off. So there's that nut there, and the other one's hidden in between the gas tank and here, so just push the gas tank out of the way. You can go inside with it with your wrench. We're going to remove part of the choke plate assembly here. So if you see this, just pull that right here and pull the spring back. You can slip the cable right off this holder right here. Okay, so that know what's the orientation before you remove it. So this side there's a big opening here with a recessed cavity in there, so that's where the spring sits, and the other side has a smaller opening here, and that's where this end sits. Okay, so make note of when you take things off, just make note how things were, so that way when you assemble it, you know exactly how it goes back together. We're going to remove this air intake hose right here, so just kind of gently screw it off on the side here, like so. Now we're going to remove these studs, and we're going to replace them with this longer stud here. So we're going to take our two nuts that we just removed from the carburetor, we're going to jam them together like this. Take your 10mm wrench, put it on the back side. Take your 10mm with your shallow socket and tighten them together like this. Once you get it tightened, go back and forth on the stud until you break it loose. Be gentle with it. Don't just immediately unloosen it like that. What will happen is that you'll pull the threads right out of the head. You don't want to do that. You just want to be gentle with it. Once it cracks open and cracks loose, then you can go ahead and wrench it out. Okay, take your time. Do not rush this. You don't want to break anything. To remove your nuts on here, just take your 10mm wrench, slip it in, set your ratchet on loosen, and you can break this loose. There we go. And then take your new studs here, thread this in. Go ahead and tighten it and jam them together. Oh, it came off. That's okay. Go ahead and thread that in. If you do move this carb, just double check to make sure that there's a gasket that sits here and that the gasket is not falling off. See that gasket here? I'm sorry if you can't see that. Let me get. So there's a gasket. Point that to you. Right there. Okay, make sure it doesn't fall off. If you don't double check that gasket, and that gasket, when you take this bolt off and it swings off and falls off on the inside, it'll cause a vacuum leak. When it does cause a vacuum leak, you have performance issues. So be sure that gasket is not knocked off loose or anything like that. Okay, very important. And go ahead and screw your carburetor bolt in until it bottoms out. Finger tight. Alright, once it's finger tight, take your 10mm wrench and give it about a quarter turn. That's it. Okay, you don't want to tighten it down. Alright, because once you do that, you'll pull the threads right out of the head. You don't want to do that. And we're going to go ahead and do this the other side as well too. Okay, I just did the other side here, and I'm going to repeat this again. When you put the new stud in, finger tight, the stud, right, by hand until you can't tighten it anymore. Then with your 10 mil wrench, go in and do a quarter of a turn. Okay, so a quarter of a turn, that's it. You don't want to go any more tighter than that. If you crank on this, right, and you just reef on it, you'll pull the threads right out of the head. You don't want to do that. You don't want to excessively tighten the bolt. Okay, tighten it down by hand, quarter of a turn, that's it. Okay. How you know if you install the threads in correctly? You take your measuring tape and you measure it. It's about 1 inch. And if you notice the other side, it's about 1 inch as well. If you can see that. All right, that's when you know you installed it correctly. And we'll go take your factory gasket, metal gasket, put this back on like so. I'm going to take our fuel adapter, slip that on there, and there's a gasket that's included in the packet here. There are 2 gaskets in here, so one is a spare, and this is the one used. So you only use one, but I include 2 just as a spare. So the orientation of how this gasket goes is, so if you this cut corner right here on the upper right side, that goes in this way. Okay, so here it is. If you can see it, this corner right here, this is the front with that notch on the upper right hand side, goes in like this. Okay, goes in one direction. Now we're going to take this air intake tube and slip that into the fuel adapter. If your tube came off like mine did, just go ahead and remove this air box cover here. Slip everything over, push the gas tank over off on the side a little bit. And gently slip on the air intake here. It's gonna fight you a little bit, but that's okay. Just take your time. Alright, if you're having a little trouble slipping this over the fuel adapter, I would just bring the fuel adapter forward a little bit. Alright, like this. And just wiggle the tube into place. I'd make sure that the tube is in the air box first before you do so. It just makes it easier. And also, when you fish the tube back in here and have everything set in place, try not to break any of these plastic pieces in the air box. Okay, we'll go ahead and put our bolts on. We'll put this on, and we're gonna put our choke assembly back together. Remember how we put this back, okay? Not this way, this way. That recessed hole is for the spring to go into, okay? Like that. Next, we're gonna take our fuel adapter hose assembly with bracket, and we're gonna bolt it in here, and we're gonna remove these bolts from the engine mount, okay? And with our 8mm ratchet. I went ahead and removed the 2 8mm bolts. You'll notice that the engine mount is moving. That's okay. We'll go ahead now, we're gonna put our brackets in. So you're gonna want to push the engine forward in order for the holes to line up in the bracket here, okay? So push the engine a little bit. Might want to push these tabs in. And then we'll go ahead and get the bolt started while pushing the engine back, okay? So you see what I'm doing here? As I'm installing it, I'm pushing the engine back, so that way the holes will line up with the bracket. Got one side, do the same on the other side. So moving the generator, pushing it back, and then finally I can get get it started. There we go. Don't tighten it down, just keep it loose. You still have to do this other side here. Alright, I'll show you how to align this bracket here. So, here's my light. There's part of the casting of the engine. You want to have it centered in between the cavity over here. So when you set the bracket in, don't leave it off on one side or don't leave it on the other side. See how it moves? Center it right in the middle. Then tighten it down. That's how you line up the bracket. I went ahead and installed the 2 bolts there. I tightened it by hand. After they're tight, do about 1/8 of a turn. You don't have to reef on them, right? Now, take your hose. I forgot to mention pliers, but go ahead and take the spring clamp off. Slip the hose into the fuel adapter here. Like that. Bring the hose. It should be all set. Now we're going to go ahead and put the cover back on. Quick note before we put the other half of the cover on. Make sure this evap hose is tucked out and out of the way. So push in this hose. If not, it'll get pinched right here, and it just makes it impossible to install the other half of the cover. Also, this gas tank is floating on top of the engine, and how it's able to do that is that it just mounts. There's a slot inside the cover right here that it mounts to. And I'll show you what I mean. So if you look here, that ear right here sets in right here. Okay, see that? So when this gets installed, that ear has to slide into that cavity right here. Okay. When putting the other cover on, I would first tuck this under the rubber grommet first and wiggle it back together a little bit. So like I mentioned, there's an ear right here, so just go underneath here and help guide yourself into that. So if not, just go ahead and reach on the inside and just pry on the gas tank like so, and you can feel it from this side right here and lift up in the gas tank, so you can hold the gas tank underneath and wiggle it in like that. This is what I mean right here. So see, this is that gas tank here, so just take your hand and grab it like this and push the gas tank up while pushing in on the cover. That will help enclose the case. See how it goes back in together? Now go ahead and put your 2 bolts on the 3 bolts on the bottom, 6 bolts in the back, and 4 on top. Don't bolt together the front end yet. We're gonna do something in the front here. I went ahead and put all the bolts on the top, the bottom, and the back. Left the front unbolted, and don't forget to reinstall that C-clip back in here. And go ahead and tighten down your gas cap. Next, we're gonna install the kill switch here. I'll explain what the kill switch does at the end of the video here. So where we're installing it is this area right here. So instead of drilling a hole in this front panel, because as soon as you drill a hole in the front panel, you void your warranty. And I don't suggest you use this USB charger. It's not a very good charger. If you want to use a charger, I suggest getting a quality charger. And by quality charger, I mean something like this. So this is my favorite. It's an Anchor USB-C charger. It's a fast charger, much better than the one you would find on here. Alright. Alright, to uninstall this, there's a nut right here and there's a connector. So locate the connector, disconnect that. There's a plastic nut, unscrew it off. Set that off on the side. Don't throw anything away, just keep it off in a little baggie, just in case if you want to uninstall the kit and bring this back to factory. At least you have all the parts. Take this, and I would tuck it behind here where it's out of the way. Perfect where it's at. Now locate the engine off switch, which is just behind here, and there's a wire that comes out of it behind this switch, and it should look like this. Okay, you might want to, if it's not in here, you might want to look behind this panel and you'll locate it. It's a 2-pin connector. So, and there's a little clip on here. You press down on it and it should come out. Okay, see that the clip here? You gotta press down on that and just tuck it off on the side along with the other one, just like this. So just tuck it back there. Now take your kill switch, take this out of the bag here. Take this out of the way so you can see what I'm doing here. Take all your hardware out. Remove the lock nut. There's a rubber washer here. Put that on. Take your washer. There's two sides. There's a side that's round and the other side that's sharp and flat. Put the side that's rounded for the front first. And take the other washer and put it in here. See how there's two flat sides to this washer? That coincides with the panel right here with the two flat sides, and it goes in between. So we're going to go ahead put that here. Like so. There we go. See how it sits flat like that. Sorry if it's a little hard to see here. And then take your yellow washer, put that in, take the nut, and tighten that. You can take a pliers and tighten it a little bit. You don't want to crank on it. Just tighten it just enough, and you can put a drop of silicone on here so that way it doesn't vibrate loose. Next, take your harness, and you're going to want to unscrew these terminals here. So you're going to get a mini screwdriver. I should have noted this in the tool list. And go ahead and unscrew these screws. And these two wires, it doesn't matter what way it goes. Okay, it could be here or here. Okay, this way or this way, doesn't matter. And go ahead and screw the wires into the terminals, screw terminals here. And then go ahead and connect it to the harness side for the switch. I found it a lot easier to take the front panel and tuck it underneath the front panel right here like this, so you have a nice flat surface to work on. And we're going to go ahead and here's this mini screwdriver and pliers I was mentioning to tighten down the nut here, just like that. I'm going to go ahead and install these here. Once you get finger tight, do an 1/8 of a turn. Don't need to reef on them If you're cranking it down, you'll actually strip the threads on here, so be gentle with it. Same thing other side. Tighten it on by hand, finger tight. See if it doesn't tighten anymore. An eighth of a turn, that's it. And then do the pull test. Go ahead, take the harness. It only goes in one way. Okay. There we go. Clicks in. Now we can put the cover back. Just kind of tuck the wires out of the way here. So as you're putting it in, tuck everything out of the way. And put the covers on. And go ahead and replace the screws here, here, and then the bottom. Went ahead and installed all the bolts. Now we're going to put back the knob here. So it only goes in one way. So if you look at where the knob is, see how there has 3 square corners and 1 rounded. If you look on the inside with your flashlight, you can kind of see what end is rounded, and that goes in the same way you took it out. So just double check, make sure that it goes in that way. If you put it upside down, you try to install it this way, you'll crack the plastic on here. So don't do that. Make sure you have it in the way you took it out, and you can always peer in the inside with your flashlight to see what side is rounded, because it only goes in one way. Go ahead and take your long nose Phillips, set the switch on the inside, see how it goes in. Go ahead and slowly screw in the screw until you have it just stops just like that, and then do an eighth of a turn. Don't crank on it. Behind this switch is a mechanical fuel cutoff valve. That valve is made out of aluminum, and this switch directly screws into that valve. If you go in and just crank on it and just tighten it up, you'll strip the threads right on it. It's soft material, so don't overdo it. Just be gentle with it. Okay. Now we're gonna go ahead and install the cover, and I'll show you how to do that. So here's our cover. Remove this oil access door over here. You just push in, twist, and here's the door that's supposed to go on here, so it goes in like that. Okay, so here's the hardware and how to mount this door. So on the door side, you have this bracket and alcohol wipe. You take your alcohol wipe and you clean the surface here, because this has a double-sided tape on here. And we will go ahead and just install it just like that. I went ahead and took this off, installed the bracket on here, and next we're going to move on to the door. Okay, so remove this hardware. The way the door installs is this cavity or this hole is on the left side. So when we do this, take this out, install the bolt here, slip the bolt through, put your spacer in, okay, like that, and go ahead and put, you don't need to tighten it, just leave it loose. We'll do that later once the cover is on the generator. And this goes in, so there's a lock washer here. It goes on the outside, and the spacer goes on the inside, and the spacer will have that there. Okay. Make sure that there are 3 tabs here. Make sure they all go into that slot. Okay. Went ahead and tightened the 4 screws down, and next will be installing this door here. And I know some of you are wondering, with this in the way, is there enough room for me to access the oil fill neck? There's plenty of room. So if you go on inside here, if you notice, I can still go with my whole hand. Without any issues. Have access and still be able to change oil on this without it being in the way here. Alright, take your door, take your spacer, slip this aside first while keeping the whole hardware loose here, and line that up to that bracket in the back there. Screw it in. I would tighten the bottom first. You don't need to crank on it. Finger tight, right? 1/8 of a turn. You don't have to crank on it. Same thing on top. Get it tight enough, finger tight, 1/8 of a turn. No rattles. That's how you're supposed to install it. Alright, after putting the covers back on, everything's bolted up. The last thing to do on this generator is replacing the spark plug. And here's the spark plug access door. So push in, lift up. You'll see the boot and the plug itself. You're going to want to pull up on it and just wiggle and pull up. And once you do that, inspect for any damage or rips and tear in this boot, and also check the spark plug that's in here. You can be replacing that with NGK plugs. To install the NGK plugs in properly, I'm going to take a sample from our previous video on different installation for another generator, and I believe that in that video I did my best explaining how to install the spark plug. So I'm just gonna give you an example here. So here's a video from YouTube from another generator, and we're gonna play that, and we're gonna come back to our installation of the kit on this generator. I almost forgot, before we put the cover on, we will need to change the factory spark plug from this generator. The spark plug that's used in this generator is an off-brand Chinese spark plug, and we do recommend upgrading the spark plug. In the kit, we include a free NGK spark plug that replaces the Chinese unit in here. It idles and starts up much better with the NGK plugs. Also, I know I will have folks ask me, well, what about the Iridium plugs? Can I run those? Yes, you can run those. What's the difference between the regular plugs and the Iridiums? In my opinion, it has a little bit better cold start. Idle's a little bit smoother. That's what I've noticed. Not much of a difference, but supposedly Iridium plugs they fire a little bit better, and they don't foul as much as the regular spark plugs. Another quick note: it's also good to double check when pulling the spark plug boot out. Be very gentle with it. Make sure that it's not cracked, and also to make sure the factory spark plug is not cracked. There's been 1 or 2 instances where I've heard feedback from customers. They said that, well, they found their spark plug boot cracked, or the spark plug has been cracked itself. So maybe somebody at the factory who were installing this and putting together the generator maybe rough handled the generator a little bit and accidentally cracked the boot and so forth. If you catch that initially, you can get replacement parts, or you can return the generator to Harbor Freight, and they will give you a new replacement. But it's good to double check these, because it may not happen to every generator, but it may be a rare occurrence, but it's just good to double check these, okay? So when you get this, you will need to gap the spark plug. If you do run Iridium plugs, what I've come to find out is that you don't really need to gap them. If you want to gap them, go ahead. I tested the generator with it gapped to 25 thousandths, and between the spark plug that's been gapped and not gapped, I myself haven't noticed much of a difference when on the Iridium plugs. But for the regular NGK plugs, I do notice a huge difference. You will have to gap the spark plugs on the regular NGK plugs. So as we remove the spark plug, you again need to have a 13/16 deep well socket on an extension, on a ratchet, crack it loose, okay? And when it comes time to gap these spark plugs, it's very important on the tool of choice that you'll be using to gap the spark plug. Okay, so you don't want to use a sliding gap gauge tool, which is here. So this is a the type of spark plug gap tool. That's about, I say that I purchased it at Walmart for about 99 cents. I do not suggest using this. Okay. Well, the reason why I don't suggest using that is because, well, I'm gonna take that back. If you're just using it on a regular spark plug, it's okay, because what happens is that this feeler gauge here, so the thickness from here to here goes from greater to least, and you use that to slide in between the electrode and the terminal here on the spark plug. All right. If you do that on an iridium plug, that iridium plug has an iridium tip. It's laser welded on there. So it's a piece of metal, very small piece of metal, laser welded on there. If you use this tool, okay, and you were to put it in between here to set the gap, what happens is that you'll knock off or chip out the iridium tip. You'll break that off, and then you'll make this spark plug useless. The correct tool to do this and set the gap is with this tool. Okay, it has little prongs on here. So what you do is that you see those little that gap right there, that cavity. You stick that right on the tip right here, and you pry it in a little bit to set the gap. And I'll show you how to do that here. Okay, you take this tool here. I removed one of the tools out of the packet here, and you see I have this right here. You put it in here, and you pry up on it, and that closes the gap in between the tip and the terminal here. Okay, and if you adjust, and then you can go ahead and with this feeler gauge here, you can place the feeler gauge in between here. Okay, like this, and there should be readings on these in the feeler gauge. You can measure, the gap on there. Okay, this is the correct way of gapping the spark plug, rather than sliding this feeler gauge in between the tip and the terminal. Okay, because this one, when you do that, it keeps the tip, especially if it's a iridium tip, intact. Another rule of thumb: if you just take your time and do little by little until you close the gap. Don't go all the way in it, measure it, and find out that you do too much, and come back at it, and then go back at it again. Every time you do this more than 3 times back in three different directions, right? So one, you did too much. You did too little here, or too much again. What happens is that you'll introduce a hairline fracture or crack in the welded tip. This will weaken the metal in here, and on some rare occasions, this tip will fall off into the engine. You do not want to constantly close the gap, open it back up, close the gap. If you do it more than 3 times, throw away the plug. Okay, it is a lot cheaper to throw away a plug than it is to throw away a generator. Folks are saying, "Hey, you're being a little bit too picky." Well, I've taken automotive classes. I've been in the automotive field for 7 years. So when my teacher says don't do that, don't do it. Okay. Now that we finished gapping the spark plug, I know folks are gonna ask, "Okay, where do you get this tool from?" So I purchased this from AutoZone. This is $5. This is a little bit expensive, between $7 or $8. I find this to be a lot more useful because right here, if you look in the back, the measurements on here goes all the way down to 25 thousandths. I recommend 24 thousandths. Some people like to do 22 thousandths. I like 24 thousandths. So 0.024 is the measurement I recommend if you gap the spark plug, and that doesn't quite go all the way down. Okay, but this one does. If you look in the back, you can see how there's more broader ranges of measurements with the feeler gauge. So this tool is worth the price. And not only that, you can also use it to do valve adjustments when you do maintenance on this generator, you can also use this tool. So not only can you do the spark plug gap, you can also use it on here. I'm not going to go over how to do this. You can go online and so forth. If you're not comfortable doing it, you can bring this into your small engines repair shop, and they can do that for you. If you know how to do it and you're fairly mechanical, you can go ahead and use this fuel gauge on here and double check valve clearances and so forth. So this to me is very useful, and you can purchase this locally, and it's fairly cheap. So another thing I should mention is after you install a new spark plug, people will say, how tight should I put down the spark plug? You can read in your user guide. It'll have the torque specs on there on how to tighten down the spark plug. I recommend screwing in the spark plug by hand so you don't cross thread anything. If you can't turn it in by hand, that means that there's something caught on the threads or something wrong. So always feel it by hand first. Once you have it screwed in all the way by hand, you can't go any further. Then come in with your ratchet. Tighten it a little bit. The washer, it's on the spark plug here. So right here, the spark plug, there's a crush washer. Okay, so you tighten that down with your wrench until it stops. Right, and after it stops, do a quarter of a turn, and that's tight enough. Okay, if you like to know exactly how to tighten it, you can read up torque specs and so forth, but that's how I tighten it, and I wouldn't go any tighter than that. All right, and also only remove the spark plug when the engine is cold, never hot, because the head the threads on the head expands and compresses depending on the temperature. So if you remove a spark plug when the engine is hot, you'll actually start stripping the threads. Okay, so only remove the spark plug when the engine is cold. Well, of course, when you're installing this kit, the engine is cold anyways, but if there's any instances where you have to service a spark plug, don't do it when it's hot. Okay, do it when the engine's cold. All right, so now we can put the covers back on and move on to the next step. All right, I already went ahead and replaced the factory plugs with the NGK plugs, and that pretty much wraps up the installation of the kit on this generator. And before I end the video, I did mention I was going to explain what this kill switch does when installed on this generator. So on this fuel selector knob here, there's off, run, and choke. Okay, so everyone knows that when the engine is running, okay, to turn off the generator, you switch this to off. Behind this switch does two things. So there is a mechanical fuel cutoff valve behind here, and not only that, if you hear that click, there is a mechanical switch that's tied into the ignition system. So when you turn it to off, it immediately kills the engine, and immediately does that by killing the ignition system. So when you're running alternative fuel, you actually want to have this in the off position, right? Because behind here, like I said, behind this switch, there's a mechanical shutoff valve for the gas from the gas tank to the carb. You don't want any fuel flowing from the gas tank to the carb, and when you put it in the off position, it cuts the fuel. Okay. Problem is that not only does it cuts off the fuel, it cuts off power from the ignition system. So with this switch installed, what it does is it goes in between, it plugs in between the switch here and the engine harness, and so when you're having it in the off position, it still allows the generator to continue running. So it does two purposes. So if you're running on gasoline, it runs the fuel tank dry, or runs runs the float bowl dry, because you're cutting off fuel from the gas tank going to the carb. So it's also can be called a rundown switch, because you're running the carburetor float bowl dry. Once you do that, it's empty. This ignition system is still active. It's still active for you to run alternative fuels. Now you can go ahead and do so. Do you need to have this switch installed? Yes or no. You can leave it in the run position. Problem is that now the fuel valve is open, and any fuel in the gas tank will run in the carb, and it will and if you're running on alternative fuels, it will mix in with propane or natural gas. It's gonna run rough. You don't want that. So we provide the switch over here, so that way you can have it be in the off position, cut any fuel flow from the gas tank if there's any, allows the carb to drain down with the engine running, and once the engine stops running, then you can switch over to run alternative fuels and so forth. My recommendation is getting rid of all the gas in the tank let it run out. All right, let the generator die out, have it be completely bone dry, and that's it. That's my recommendation. But there's some customers who say I want to still have fuel in the gas tank, just there when I'm ready to have it. I'll say, okay, it's fine. Turn it off, run the generator, went to the fuel, gets emptied out from the carb float bowl, then you can go ahead and run your alternative fuels. Another mention that I know I'm going to be getting is, why not put the switch on halfway like this? There's a problem with that. When you put it on halfway like this, it's like turning the faucet halfway off. You're going to get drips going from the gas tank to the carb. Proper way of shutting off the fuel completely is having it completely in the off position. Sure, it might work like this. You're still not yet clicking into the switch, but it's still enough to shut off the fuel flow mechanically. But the thing is that you trust that. I don't. You know, in the manual it says that to completely have it in these positions here or here. You don't put anything halfway. I wouldn't trust even putting it here. It may work, but that's, to me, it's not the right way of doing it. If it's the right way, to me, the right way of doing it is have it completely off, knowing in my mind that I'm not going to be having any risk of any drips of fuel coming from the gas tank to the float bowl and such. Another thing with this switch is you can still turn the generator off. Let's say during an emergency situation, something is shorted out and you see sparks flying or whatever, and you can you can run to the generator and hit the switch and it'll kill everything, regardless if you're on gasoline, propane, or natural gas. So having this switch here is kind of like a safety feature, okay? Now that we finished installing the kit and I explained everything else, we're going to quick go over the top 10 most important operational procedures and starting procedures when operating this generator on propane or natural gas. First, obviously, as I explained, empty the gas tank and carb before starting on propane or natural gas, if it has ever ran on gasoline. So be sure that the float bowl is empty, and it wouldn't hurt if the gas tank is empty as well. You don't want the two fuels mixing when you're using alternative fuels, or else you're going to get starting or running issues. So be sure that there's no residual gasoline left in the system when starting on propane or natural gas. Okay. 2, prime demand regulator 3 times before starting. This is very important. When you start the generator, you want to hit this prime button 3 times, and during those 3 times you want to hold the button down between 2 to 3 seconds each time that you prime. Okay, if you notice that the generator doesn't start, you may want to hold it longer, okay, like this, and you will hear a hiss coming from the regulator assembly. If you don't, you can tilt the demand regulator up and down while hitting the button until you hear a hiss. Okay. Number 3, always start with eco switch off, choke off, and nothing plugged into the generator. Okay. So have it in the off position right here. Economy switch in the off position, nothing plugged in. That way, when the generator starts up cold, it's a lot easier to start that way when you don't have when everything is in order, man. There's no load on the generator. You don't want to have appliances plugged in while it's drawing load as you're starting it. You will damage the inverter unit. It stresses out the inverter unit, and it's not healthy doing that. Okay. Number 4, always warm up the generator, especially when using a colder plug. You will notice when you start up this generator, it will run a little bit off, meaning that you'll hear a little bit of a hesitation. And if you switch to eco mode on right when you start this generator, especially on a cold day, it will start idle hunting. That is normal, especially when you're using colder plugs. If you let this generator idle and leave the eco switch in the opposite position, let it idle for about 15 minutes, a little bit more if you're in a colder climate, and once the generator warms up, it will idle smooth. Okay, it's just because we're using a colder plug. That plug needs to get warmed up. All right. Number 5, place the blue cap under the demand regulator during operation. Okay. So you see this arrow here, it says mount up. Not only do you have to mount it up, it has to be in a vertical position. This is how it operates and it's optimal. Not like this, not like that. Up and down, straight up and down, okay? And there's that blue cap you can put underneath here. That way it stands nice and straight and tall, like this, okay? That's a proper way of setting the demand regulator. And not only that, this whole assembly may vibrate a little bit, and with the blue cap underneath it, you're not going to get that tinging sound from it hitting against the propane tank, okay? Number 6, never place the propane tank directly at the exhaust. I know it's very tempting to do that, especially when you're in a colder climate. Don't do it. You don't want to have hot spots in this tank. Is it going to do anything? Probably not, but I sure wouldn't want to find out if something ever goes wrong. I don't want that liability. So my recommendation is don't put anything, or especially leave the generator on near anything that will possibly melt, especially in the side of the house if you have stucco or vinyl siding of the house. This thing does get hot. Leaving it against something like this for long periods of time, let's say if this was a wall, will damage the wall. Leave it in an open area. Don't put anything behind it. All right, just use a little bit of common sense. Okay. All right. Next stop on the list. Never park the generator on dirt or grass or snow, or even worse yet, on a puddle of water. On the bottom side of this generator, there's an intake. I believe there's an intake here and an intake here. It's near the ground. If you have it in grass, especially tall grass, you will block air intake going into the generator. Okay, don't leave it in snow. When snow melts, as this thing gets warmer, it'll suck in water. You don't want to have it suck in water. If you do, you'll damage the inverter board. Don't leave it on a puddle of rain. Especially don't leave it outside while it's drizzling on wet ground. Prop it up on a chair. Prop it up on a cart like I have right here. Do something. Don't put it on the ground. Not only that, the ground is dirty. You can't trust that it's always clean. So that's why when you open up this generator, there's always dirt on the inside. It's because it's intaking air from the ground. So when you have it propped up, it keeps the generator clean. All right. So always have it on a flat surface, away from grass, away from dirt or anything like that. You don't want to be sucking any contaminants in the generator. Okay. Number 8. Never run the generator in the rain. It is not waterproof. Especially, don't leave the generator in the hot sun. Treat the generator as you would treat yourself. Okay, this is one. There's not any single waterproof electrical connection in this generator. If water gets in it, you'll short something out. When you short something out, something such as electrical components, ignition system will go out, and you will ruin your generator. Okay. Also, don't leave it out in the hot sun. This will get heat soaked. All the components on the inside will start to overheat, and you can potentially shut down the generator or lose longevity of the inverter unit. Okay, put it underneath the shade. I'm not saying you can't operate outside. If you're going to be using this, have something covering the top of it. You can. I've seen folks, use an umbrella. That way, if it's raining or anything like that, you're not getting the generator wet. Some folks modified a doghouse with venting on the side and stuff these generators in a doghouse. Something that you're going to cover this generator with, right? Keep it away from the elements. And especially when it's hot out too. So having this thing operate in shade is going to go a long ways in keeping the generator running cool. Okay. Number 9. Let's see here. Number 9 says change oil with oil extractor and use a magnetic dipstick. So this is what I have. I have a Briggs & Stratton oil extractor and magnetic dipstick. See how it's pictured right here? So there's a vacuum pump. Stick the tube down. Well, this one shows that you can also extract gasoline from the gas tank, but I use it to do oil. So when you do your oil changes, you just go ahead and stick that tube in the oil fill neck, then you can extract oil from this much more cleanly than having to tilt the generator and hope that you get every bit out, and and also hope not to make a mess. But to me, this is a much efficient way of doing an oil change. I know folks are going to tell me, well, if you're not completely emptying out the oil from here, there's going to be bits and pieces of shaving, metal shavings and stuff at the bottom of the generator here on the inside. Well, not true. If you have a magnetic oil dipstick, it'll catch all the contaminants and it'll catch all the metal shavings and so forth. So when you have this, there's really no need for you to tilt the generator and try to empty every single last drop out of it, as long as you have an oil extractor and a magnetic oil dipstick. Okay, that'll help you out a lot, and it keeps the generator nice and clean. Okay, and number 10, shut down propane or natural gas at the source. So when you're operating the generator and propane, this is an example, shut it off here. When you do that, it'll bleed the whole line of fuel, and that's the way of doing it properly. And same thing with natural gas. Walk up to your natural gas outlet, shut it off from there, and the generator will turn off eventually. So that's the proper way of shutting off the generator when running alternative fuels. I would not use that kill switch to shut anything off, okay? Because if you do so, there will still be fuel lingering in this line. You'll smell the propane or natural gas coming from the line, because you're not using up all the fuel from the line when you shut it off from there. So always shut it off at the source. All right, guys. If there's any comments, questions, or feedback, I would love to know. I'd love to hear it. If you could subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up, that'd be much appreciated. There'll be more kits for in the near future. I'm a busy man. I've been trying to do. If you see here, there's several more. This is just scratching the surface of what I have. I have 40 or 50 more generators in the warehouse that I still got to do, but I'm getting into it slowly. So I appreciate the patience. All right, thanks, guys.